Yeah. Okay. I was sort of just thinking about the contradiction of women's bodies, that in a sense, at one level, at the most intimate and day-to-day level, our bodies belong to us, or they should. But particularly with women's bodies, they don't. And I know that your focus is on religion and secularism, but it also struck me as the role that the state has played in terms of a stake in our bodies. And recently, the whole thing around virginity testing came up again because it was banned by the British state recently. And we were reminded of the time when the British state actually used it against Asian women who were coming to Britain as brides, and they were subjected to the virginity test in order to, so our own culture, our own patriarchal culture was being used against us as an excuse by the British state to say, well, if you are coming for an arranged marriage, you have to be a virgin, and if you're not a virgin, then that marriage is not genuine, and therefore you can't enter this country. So and I was thinking again about how the hymens of the Egyptian women in Tahrir Square, they were subjected to virginity testing by the police. And then there was the nude Tunisian blogger, Amina Tyler. And I think her family basically got hold of her, beat her up, and her grandmother or somebody subjected her to, virginity testing because they felt that she had no morals because she had posted pictures of herself with slogans written across her chest. So it feels like our families, our communities, the men in our lives, whose honor seems to sort of ride barebacked on our bodies. And of course, then the religious leaders who want more and more of our bodies to be covered up. So stripping ourselves of our clothes, of flaunting our nude bodies can be an extremely powerful statement. But the question for me is, does nudity mean the same thing in the UK or in the West generally as it does in the Middle East or in the Asian subcontinent? So I wanted to talk about the context in which our bodies can become effective political and campaigning tools. So in the West, you have a kind of a sense of freedom, that you can wear a bikini on the beach, you can go sunbathing, you can be topless, you can wear minis and shorts. But despite the ubiquity of the naked female body in the West, it's still fetishized. And women's bodies are used for marketing and selling goods, and how a woman dresses still in some quarters becomes a justification for rape. So in the West, you could pose the question, how does stripping fight sexism? Can you actually market feminism with women's bodies? Is that really different from marketing anything else? So it's this thing about the success of nudity as political protest really depends largely on the context. And there was this really funny story in Mona El-Tahawi's book, Hymens and Headscarves, where she says that there was this, in the Tunisian parliament, a woman asked a Salafi member of the Constituent Assembly a question. And when he refused to answer her, because he said he didn't speak to naked women, she was not wearing a hijab, that's why she was naked. So what she did was she started to undress in front of him. And the Salafist was horrified. And he demanded to know what she was doing. And she said, well, I'm showing you what a naked woman looks like. And then he promptly answered her question because he didn't want her to go any further. But I didn't know that Jenny was going to be here. So, and because I'd interviewed Ina Shevchenko of Femen some years ago, I wanted to sort of look at, how the nude protests of Femen, which have taken place mainly in the West, attracted so much debate and criticism by radical feminists. And I know, I mean, I presume you've been talking about, I just want to pause a moment and mention the war in Ukraine and the brave men and women there. And also, I suppose, the protesters against Putin in Russia. You know, 50 feminine activists wearing the colors of Ukraine gathered in Paris to support, you know, free Ukraine with anti-Putin slogans on their breasts. So I don't want to talk too much about feminist activism, because I'm sure that Jenny will cover quite a lot of that. But it was, I found that with a lot of my radical feminist friends, quite a lot of criticism of feminine. And it's quite difficult. I mean, the interesting thing about feminine that I just want to raise, since particularly because we often talk about Islamism, is that feminine and, you know, Shevchenko, they were actually protesting partly about dictatorship, partly about the sex industry, but also the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. I think that's quite an important reminder that, you know, we can't equate extremism only with Islam, because institutionalized religion of all denominations are dangerous to your health. So this thing about, you know, when Muslim women use their bodies to make a political statement, I think it has a different meaning. I think it has also been criticized in the West. I remember when a woman in Pakistan, Kandil Baloch, she was killed by her brother because, you know, for bringing shame to the family, because she had these sort of, in their words, sexually charged videos. And I remember being part of a Facebook debate where some older white British feminists said, were very critical of Baloch. They said, so, and I've got a quote here which says, so, you know, they asked whether Baloch, if she's joining the oppressive Western world and slathering herself in makeup and posting videos of herself twerking and always doing the bidding of men, is that so empowering? They asked. But, you know, but if nothing is as undermining of religious patriarchal mores as a woman flaunting her sexuality. And I think that's the context that sometimes is missing in Western feminist debates about nudity and using women's body as a political protest. I think that's all I really want to say for starters.
Thank you, Rahila. I think you raised a lot of important points, and I am going to ask Jenny to comment after that and give her opening remarks. I do want to make a few points, just because I think it would be nice to have this as an informal discussion, is the fact that I think I'm not so sure I agree with you about context mattering, because I think you know, we do live in an age of social media now, an age of internet, where the actions and protests in one country have direct effects on actions and protests in other places. And I know, for example, you know, when I took part in an action, it was not a feminine action, but it was an action of women from the Middle East and North Africa in front of the Louvre in Paris in 2014. After that action, you know, there was riots in Pakistan, people wanting our death. And in Paris itself, we were arrested by the police for nudity. So I think, you know, there is this. So my point, firstly, is that it has an effect everywhere. And you have people pro and against it everywhere, including in the West, including in the so-called East, you know, so because it's a political stance more than it being a question of whether you live in the UK or you live in Iran, for example. And I think even though there's a lot of nudity here in the West, it's very much around the commodification and of women selling things with women's bodies or pornography. And I think that's why even in the West, you know, nudity as a political protest is something that's considered offensive, taboo, and something that's unacceptable, also, and shocking to the point of, you know, Facebook will delete one of our protests, topless protests, but you know, for sure, there'll be things that are kept on because it fits within the standards of what, you know, a woman's role of titillation and you know, sexualized for the male gaze, basically. So I think, you know, for me, it's very relevant, still here. And it was interesting because I got a letter from Nawal El-Saadawi, a great, wonderful Egyptian feminist who unfortunately is no longer with us, who was critical of nude protest, whether it happens in, you know, by Alia Majd El-Mahdi in Egypt or Amina Saboui in Tunisia, or when I did it, for example, here in France or the UK. And so I think, again, it's a political question, more so than one on context. And that's just my position on things. But Jenny, if I...
Yeah, the only point I was trying to make was that, say, the Tunisian woman, she would actually be facing death. She would have to escape. She would have to leave the country that she's living in. I take your point about the ubiquity of social media and the fact that, you know, there are international actions which affect, which are known all around the world. But in places like Pakistan or Iran, or you get killed in a way, you know, for it, in a way that it's a different context. And I was really drawing attention to feminists who are against pornography and who are against the commodification of women's bodies, who don't know what to make of, I mean, and I have argued in support of Femen, but I think that, but it is at some level easier to support Amina Tyler or something, if you see what I mean, because it feels like here where you're allowed to strip, I mean, you know, I know it's fetishized and so on. It has a different meaning to where, you know, it's so taboo that it just, you know, even taking off your hijab, you know, becomes a revolutionary act. You know, forget nudity. So that was, I think, the point I was trying to make.
Maybe now we can hear some comments and contributions from Jenny, and then we'll come to you, Victoria. Thank you for that, Rahila.
Thank you. Well, to start, I mean, you who are here know, but I just want to say that Femen began in Ukraine 2008. And regarding the situation now with Putin's war, we have been doing actions to show the problem that Putin is since more than a decade now. And that's the point of the activism, to call the attention to something that is not enough discussed, that needs a change. And now we can only regret that people did not realize in time that Putin is a complete madman. And of course, if we use our bodies and can call the attention, I think there's nothing wrong about that. And I can't see that there should be any way of, even if these women, that it's a big activism just to take off the hijab, it doesn't mean that we should stop. It's like we all need to do what we can from where we are, and it's all the same kind of oppression. It's like in Sweden before, you couldn't show your legs, and even men couldn't show their legs. I mean, it's all of it is part of the same patriarchal way of wanting to control and own and like organize our bodies in a way that we don't have our own saying about. So when Femen began in Ukraine, it was against the sex industry, it was against the dictatorship, it was against the theocracy, because all the religions, especially the ones that originated in the Middle East, the Abrahamic religions, are so focused on the hierarchy of putting men above women and like owning the right to decide over our lives. And that's the, like, even if you take my body without context, like what's the non-context? The non-context is that you are born naked and without clothes. And this is like the less context I can find, because that's back to basic. And by Islam, that's evil, that's bad, that's haram, that's something that is wrong. So the context is that Islam has a problem that the other religions also had, but don't have so much anymore. And the more you get upset about our body, the more you want to discuss our body, the more the focus is our body, the more that means that it's still something that we need to get people to get used to it. And I saw here in the comments from Leon in the chat, and I agree about the individual point of view. For me, it's not only about women's rights, it's about children's rights, it's about individual rights. I think it would be interesting today to discuss the current situation in India, where girls with hijab are protesting because they can't get into school with hijab. I think it's interesting because even I am not 100% sure sometimes, because for me, of course, a girl or a woman should have the right to wear whatever she wants, if it is to cover herself completely or if it is to uncover herself completely. And it shouldn't always be an issue about what women wear or not wear, because it's women that is the focus. But when I look at the situation with the question of girls wearing hijab or not in school, I, for example, as it is today, I think France has chosen a good compromise to not accept religious symbols in the public schools, in public, well, like, for example, I, as an activist, sometimes when the police take me and I'm in arrest and there is police or other authorities, lawyers that I meet, if my activism is in a mosque, I feel rather uncomfortable if I meet a police woman with hijab, because I feel prejudged and I feel that it's a profession where you should be neutral. So that's an example of why I think it's good that you should not have religious symbols. In the same time, as I understand that it's also part of the anti-racist movement, and that women should have the right to dress whatever. But again, when I come back to these children with the hijab, I think what is very important for us in Femen to always unveil is hypocrisy. And for example, when I spoke some years ago with activists from Tunisia, when Tunisia won the Nobel Prize later for the advances for women's rights, I was also told that they had seen a 20-year evolution of Islamism growing, because about death threats, yes, you get killed in Pakistan for almost nothing if you don't follow Islam. But us protesting for Muslim, ex-Muslim or even Muslim women who don't follow the rules in Tunisia, me doing that in Sweden, I received death threats too. I received hundreds, I received thousands, I received 50,000. It comes like in waves for different things. Like the last wave, I had like 50,000 threats on my social media. So it's a global situation also with the threats. But what they told me about Tunisia, because when I joined Femen as an activist 2013 for Amina, with Mariam and with Farida and Inna, there was a spike in Islamism in that time in Tunisia, with politicians getting murdered a lot that summer 2013, just like opening the door and somebody came with a motorbike and shot them and killed them. And I was told that this has been going on for like 20 years, slowly. Always like, okay, you have to respect Islam, and then Saudi Arabia is sending Qurans, they are sending school books that they have Islamic touch. There's all these small steps that each one of them seem innocent. Like it seems very innocent that girls should have the right to wear hijab in school. But I think you have to see if this is really the truth or if it's hypocrisy, because for me, about children, I think they should have the right to wear whatever they want in school. But that's not the case. When you say you should have the right to wear hijab, the case is that you can not the other day come in a bikini. That girl cannot come in a bikini the other day. Not even the other girls, not even anybody can come dressed as they want. So the real case where we should respect the creativity and the freedom and the individuality, and that's that person that a child is, that's what I think is interesting to discuss. And that is not something that we are going to support by saying that that hijab is a right for girls in their religion, because the religious cause wants respect but doesn't respect. I get lots of comments about posts I make, also from women, where they ask me, like, why don't you respect my choice? Or now in Sweden, where there is this new Islamic party that is saying, like, it's our human right to do this and do that. But just like it took 20 years for Islamism to grow stronger in Tunisia and in many other places where it's always coming from the outside, it's been happening the same thing in Sweden now, not with the Islamists, but with the right-wing party, the alt-right of the conservative nationalists. Nobody thought that they would gain power. It took them 20, 30 years. So it's all these small steps that seem correct, that seem democratic, that seem human rights, everything, where we constantly have to challenge what is the truth behind, like what is the real agenda, what is the true cause. And I think in all this, using our bodies is a very, very good way, because as soon as people get upset about what we wear or not wear, I think what is unrevealed is patriarchal hypocrisy.
Thank you, Jenny. You make some really, really interesting points, and I hope we'll carry on discussing them. I think on the issue of veiling, it is a complex issue, as you say, and I think with child veiling in particular, I do think it's a form of child abuse. There is no choice really involved when it comes to children, and children have to be protected, and the state is duty bound to protect children. And I think that's where possibly, you know, the question of choice is really not just hypocrisy, but deception, because it's not true that children have a choice to work if they want to smoke if they want to refuse to go to school if they want to. There's some things that that society thinks are good for children, and their welfare has to be paramount. And I think with the question of child veiling, it should really be seen as a form of child abuse. Victoria, can we come to you now to give your remarks and also comments on anything you've heard? Thank you, Jenny. Victoria, you have to unmute yourself. Hi, Victoria. If I think you're still muted, if you can unmute yourself. Maybe while we're waiting for Victoria, Rahila, would you like to come back with some?
I'd quite like to come back to the question of the hijab in India. See,
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
and I think, you know, it also applies to the discussion in France and Britain and so on. And that is, India at the moment is under, you know, almost a fascist right-wing Hindutva, you know, Hindu nationalist government. And much of the liberalism of their policies is driven by an anti-Muslim agenda. So that really complicates the matter, I feel. I mean, first of all, I'm not for banning the hijab in any context, particularly where Muslim communities are under siege, are facing racism from the communities in which the so-called host societies in which they live. So I'm not for banning it. But what I don't like is that we're not even allowed to debate it, because if you talk about it, you're immediately Islamophobic. And I think that, you know, like any question, it should be open to debate. And I do think that, I mean, I don't need to rehearse the arguments against the hijab in this group, but it becomes very complicated when you are faced with a situation like the Indian government, you know. And so in that situation, when, and I agree with Jenny in the sense that, you know, do children make a choice about wearing the hijab or not? I mean, you know, obviously they're coerced by their parents and families to wear the hijab. But I don't know.
Sorry guys, can you see me? Because I actually had a major tech issue and I just had to restart everything. So I apologize. So can you all see me? Can you hear me? Hello?
Hi, Victoria. Just if you don't mind, Rahila's going to finish her points, but stay on because you're right after her. She's just making some final points.
Well, I will just end up repeating myself. I mean, I think I've made the general point that I wanted to make about that issue.
Thank you, Rahila. Yes, I mean, I think that's also quite a complex issue. Victoria, please go ahead.
Can you hear me? My
Yes.
screen keeps, I'm having serious tech issues and my screen keeps freezing up and crashing. So I'm hoping I'm going to stay with everybody long enough to actually get my points across. So yeah, I mean, obviously from my side of things as a body artist, I will always use body painting as a tool for healing and empowerment, especially for empowering women's bodies, because there's so much in terms of the objectification of a body, the commodification of the body, like selling off pieces of it, especially in mainstream media. And if you're not being commodified, you're, you know, being basically put into a cloth bag and told, you know, that's your lot. And actually women have a right across the world, as far as I'm concerned, like we should have the right to, if we want to pick up a brush and some paints and paint on ourselves, then that is our human right. It's our human right to self-expression, and it's part of freedom of conscience and freedom of expression. And without those, you know, humanity dies. And so this is why I've chosen to use body paint in a lot of different ways, because you're actually taking, if you use body paint in the right way, you can take sexuality out of it. It's about you using your body the way you want to. And there's some people who do want to do things in a sexualized or sensual way. But if you're doing things in terms of political protest, it's actually one of the things that is evolutionarily ingrained in us, is to create supernormal stimulus, which is what you do when you cover a body with body paint. And if you're, say, for example, we're in a pride march and you're covered in paint, there's no way someone's going to be looking away, because that's something that's novel. It's something that's not of the norm. And then if you're using your body with, you know, with bright colors, with slogans, in a non-sexualized manner, that to me is really, really powerful. That to me is like, that's like the epitome of self-expression, because your body is your canvas. You can do whatever you want with it. And, you know, for me, it's a brush, paints, and you, and no one can tell you what to do. And that to me is just really just true freedom. And I also, I mean, I get a lot of criticism from multiple different camps anyway. So so in terms of how I look and I choose to present myself, there are some feminists who absolutely hate the way I do my makeup. And they say, oh, why are you wearing clown makeup? Why are you wearing drag makeup? And I'm going, well, first of all, good luck trying to copy it. But secondly, you know, this is about what I like. I like things like this came to me from kind of like the punk movement, the proto-goth movement, where people were actually able to express themselves in a different way. I've always been an advocate for self-expression since I was a child. And I used to be like, I was constantly bullied. I was constantly belittled, constantly beaten up for the way I wanted to present myself. And there's absolutely no way I'm stopping now. And to me, like, this is one of the biggest reasons I wanted to go out and help other people express themselves in a non-objectifying way. Because like when you're able to control kind of your look and control kind of how you want to present yourself to the world, that's such a huge form of autonomy. And especially if you're saying, look, I don't care what the culture is telling me to do. I don't care how I'm meant to look. I don't care how, you know, or actively fighting against that culture of saying, oh, I need to be, you know, subdued. I need to look kind of classically female, or I need to be, you know, wearing an hijab. If you're actively fighting against that, and it's scary when you start, but the more you do it and the more power and control you exert over yourself, there really is, I believe, a full psychological change that happens when you are able to use your body that way. And it becomes, you know, people can start off kind of like this and very kind of, you know, closed off in their body language, and you start kind of using it, and then, you know, it's almost like when you have the body paint on, it's like wearing another skin anyway, and you feel empowered. It's almost like, it sounds really cliche, but it's almost like a superhero suit in a way, where you can kind of suit up by unsuiting, and you can go out and just tell people exactly what it's about, you know. And I feel like it's like there's such a big force for change, and it's why, you know, I've liked to do things like you know, group body paintings as well, because when you can all collectively come together for a cause, that's really powerful. And oh, by the way, guys, if you want to interject at any point while I'm chatting, and you want to ask questions while I'm chatting, like, absolutely go ahead. So I don't want this to just be me monologuing, so go for it. So yeah, yeah, Leon's right. Yeah, it's the right of the individual to protest the way they want to. And yeah, getting back to Rahila's point as well about context, I think that's really important as well, because if you have been in a situation where any kind of sexual expression as a female is seen as you know, punishable by death or stoning or corrective rape, anything like that, the second you're being sexual, that's you in that context taking control of your body and your sexuality. And, you know, a woman has a right to do that. And I feel like, yeah, I think Rahila's totally right in the fact that especially, you know, Western feminists have a tendency to not necessarily see that, because, you know, we're kind of ingrained in this kind of culture, which is very hypersexualized, to the point where asexuality is happening now and people are feeling non-sexual. So there is a real saturation of sexuality, because the basic commercial premise is that sex sells. And there's the basic commercial fallacy is like, no one wants to look at men unless they're ultra hot, so have a few of those, and then the rest is just women. And so when you're kind of saturated by that, of course you want to fight against it, but at the same time not taking into context how, you know, the other you know, how the other women in the world are oppressed, really is it's myopic, it's a failing. And there needs to, you know, there really needs to be understanding and dialogue there. Otherwise, you know, it's just going to be a divide and conquer thing, where you know, you're going to have Western feminists, you know, versus people who want to leave religious oppression, and it's just going to end up where we're not going to be, you know, seeing eye to eye. So I think there needs to be greater dialogue there. And I think actually one of the bridging points could be body art, because if you're, again, doing it in a way that is non-sexual, to do with autonomy, to do with the protest point, then that to me is a bridging gap where you can say, actually, no, you can be as naked as you like, and it doesn't have to be sexual. It doesn't have to be something where you're self-objectifying. You can do that if you want, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. But this bridging point where you're going, look, a body by default is not sexual, like that's a huge thing. And I think this is something actually in the West we've forgotten. A body by default isn't necessarily sexual. It's somebody's body. If you want to use it in a sexual way and you want to be sexual with it, you can. But you know, it's like nudity and sexuality aren't the same thing. Like someone could just be naked going for a shower. That doesn't mean they're being sexual. It means they're going for a fucking shower. You know? You know? So I think this is another thing we need to think about in terms of you know, contemporary Western feminism, that nudity isn't necessarily sexuality. You know, looking at a female body by default isn't necessarily sexualizing someone, especially if they're, you know, covered in paint and doing a protest. And yeah, I'm hoping that we can use body paint in future for a bigger bridging point with this, just because I think it's got so much potential. And you know, it doesn't take long to get some people into activist body paint and actually do things like Pride and things like that. So you can do things quite quickly for a really good effect, or you can do things like more fine art body paints that take a day or so, and you can really convey points on a human body which you're not necessarily able to you know, when you're kind of holding placards. Because the other thing I love about body art is that it brings an immediacy to the problem, because you know, a person who's gone through kind of, you know, either, you know, being de-radicalized from radical Islamism, or have gone through religious oppression, or have, you know, basically fled honor killings, and then they're wearing this on their body, that's an immediate representation of what they've been through, and they're using their body as almost like an armor in that respect, and say, look, this is what my body's been through, this is what I've been through, I have a right to protest about this, and I have a right to tell you my story. And to me, that's really important, having that story on skin and making voices heard. And you know, the beautiful factor about this, it doesn't matter kind of, you know, what race, creed or color you want. If you come together under body paint to protest about one singular action, like one singular action or one singular cause, then you know, you've immediately got this like beautifully unifying thing. So for example, when you know, when we did the ground cam and drone body paint for CEMB, that's everybody came together under the CEMB colors. It didn't matter like how big they were, didn't matter if it was someone who was a, you know, a white ally, it didn't matter if there was someone who'd been with CEMB forever. The whole point was everyone had that commonality, everyone had that common goal, and they came together. And it means we can also kind of get more people in who wouldn't normally be you know, necessarily part of the cause, or maybe a little bit apprehensive about the cause. So there's also not just a unifying factor, but also a novelty factor where people want to join in. And through this, yeah, I think it's, well, A, it's a force for good, B, it's a form of bodily autonomy, and I think I'll stop there, otherwise I will carry on forever. So
thank you very much, Victoria. I mean, I think you make a really important point about the liberatory nature of sort of body art and, in a sense, nudity as political protest. And I think, you know, the first time I did it, I was 45. I didn't get my period for 6 months after doing it because I found it so difficult to do. And it's something that now, 10 years on, at the age of 55, I sometimes forget that I'm topless at Pride marches, which is the greatest thing on earth. So, but still, I still find it slightly embarrassing, especially when it comes to my family. And I think, you know, I keep telling myself it's an important form of protest, you know, and I will defend it. But again, I can see how deep seated, you know, those the shame and you know, this feeling of inadequacy of your body.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we have to ask where that comes from as well, because it's like, oh, if you're a certain age, you shouldn't do this. If you're a certain sex, you shouldn't do this. And I'm like, no. Like, and I think body paint could be a massive fuck you to that, frankly. So yeah, sorry, I should probably stop this swearing.
Thank you, Victoria. So I guess I'm wondering if people have any questions or comments. We have about 10 minutes. I would like to first give the floor to Homa, and then I'd like to also let our speakers have a few minutes to sum up. But if there's anyone also that would like to ask a question or make a comment, if you can do it briefly, raise your hands and I'll give you the floor. after Homa, or you can put your question in the chat box. Go ahead, Homa.
I just wanted to give a comment as an activist, especially now these days I work with Afghan women, open the border for Afghan women and children fleeing Taliban. So I'm in contact with people who are very enforced tradition into, they were pinned into their mind and for the past 50 years of war and Islamists and growth of Islamists and so on. And I was talking about it last night to one of the activists regarding what your session is going to be and who are invited. And I was asked, what do I think? And my straight answer was, this is the true secularism. Secularism is essential. It's essential and it comes, it's needed, it's essential and is needed by the people who are living in an environment run by Islamists. So as a result, the children are brainwashed at the school, at grown up. Some of the children, they reach to the age of 30 and they never seen any unreligious environment by the government is enforced. Somehow, even they are interfere with the private life of individuals. So if through these rallies and demonstration, one person takes their clothes off with the statement that Jenny has already have it behind her, woman equal to man, consider what kind of a statement is going to be. It's the true secularism, freedom of religion, freedom of clothes, up to being naked. This is the basic rights. They want to take the cover out, but also by writing this and being naked, their statement would be so political and accepted. I can talk about secularism and freedom of individual rights and not having religion interfere with my life, but one scene of 5 minutes in a place where taboo is running unbelievable, it gives the whole statement of 10 hours of speech of 10 more activists. In my opinion, this is the true secularism. This is what we want in those countries. This is what we want. People feel free to wear whatever they wish and not to wear if they wish to. So this is a true example of what we really wish to have in all different countries. And I'm not going to do. Thank you for all you do. I appreciate that, Victoria. I appreciate Jenny. Your work is excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Homa. Just to read you a comment by Leon. When we were discussing child veiling, he said quite often what is presented as the rights of children really means the unfair privileges of parents to do with their children what they want. I think I'll leave that comment there, and I would like to now ask our speakers, if there isn't anyone else that wants to make a comment, and we have just a few minutes left, if we can have our speakers maybe make some final concluding remarks. Obviously, there's still quite a lot to be discussed, from the issue of veiling and banning the veil. I think that's a hugely important discussion that we may not necessarily all see eye to eye on, but one that we definitely need to have, as well as you know, the importance of nude protest in societies, in Western societies where nudity is much more permissible. Shall we start with you, Jenny, and then we'll go to Rahila, to Victoria, and then we'll end with Rahila. Please go ahead, Jenny.
Yes, well, then I want to say thank you for your eloquent explanations and talking, and then also to Homa. I feel about the discussions, I'm not so much for discussing. I was maybe when I was a teenager. Now I'm more interested in just doing the art and doing the whatever I want with my body, like Victoria explained, and I don't really care if other people are disturbed about it or not, because that's what I want to do and that's what I do. And then if people want to discuss it, fine. So what is important for me is that there are all over the world, no matter if it's West or East, or I don't care what you think about what I do, I don't care if it's East or West, there is everywhere children born all over the world in all kind of families, children that they're not at all like their parents in everything, not like their culture, not like their country. They are little individuals with a strong little rebel soul, and the division of East and West is dishonest to me, because what is the truth for me, and I think the real truth is that there is children born everywhere, no matter where on earth, that they want to have their own free choice to decide over their bodies, to decide over their lives. And no matter gender, what matters is that we have the same rights to be ourselves, no matter what body we are born in. And what I'm really proud about Feminine, I think, is the most important thing that we have made is that we have created a new archetype that was not seen before, that can now inspire girls by showing that there is something more. There is all these different choices you have of who you want to be. And now there is also the possibility that people hadn't even thought about, that you having a body that is political, because it is political as soon as somebody have a problem with it. You can just put all that political body in the face of the people that have a problem with it, and they should be able to deal with that without killing us.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm going to go to Victoria now, and then Rahila. I'm just going to throw out a question by Leon about what men can do to, feminist men can do to support feminism and also to smash the patriarchy. Victoria, and then Rahila.
Listen to females. Like, listen to them. Like that's the easiest thing. Like, listen to females. So many times I've been in spaces where there's been allies and they just don't listen to the concerns that females have. And they will go into obtuse theory, or they will go into certain rhetoric they may have seen on Facebook, and they won't listen to the direct problem that a female has had, because it will disagree with some rhetoric that's been in a group somewhere, and they think they have to, by default, to the letter, adhere to the orthodoxy of a particular group. And when that usually happens and the women aren't listened to, that then doesn't just cause division. I've seen in my own personal experience a number of females leave when this sort of behavior occurs. There's also a problem generally with deference to male authority, and we need to combat that. So if there is someone, you know, a woman who is competent, intelligent, capable, then they're the ones who should be leading the charge. That's just my 2 cents. If a guy does have, you know, some power and some privilege in a particular area, and they can open doors for, you know, for feminists and the people they, you know, they're allied to, then go ahead and do that. But I would just argue that, yeah, most of the time, allies just tend not to listen. Male allies tend not to listen to females, and that needs to be done. So yeah, just listen to the females around you, please. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Victoria. Rahila?
Well, before I answer that question, it's a tough question. I just wanted to just reflect on, you know, some of the things that have been said, and to say that I really do admire you, Mariam, and women like Jenny, who can strip naked and, you know, and make that political protest. I couldn't do it myself. So I think it's a really, and it was good to hear from you, Mariam, about how difficult it is, and yet you challenge yourself and you push yourself forward to do that. So, you know, it's great. And listening to Victoria talk, she was so passionate about body paint. I almost felt that there should be a new human right, the right to have your body painted. You know? All fight and challenge everybody to have, you know, if they don't want their bodies painted. On the question of smashing the patriarchy, I mean, I second what Victoria said, but I would also say that men have a responsibility to challenge other men.
Yes.
And, you know, wherever they see violence against women, where they see women being talked down to, you know, that is where the real sort of political activity by men is going to be helpful to women. Generally speaking, people in power do not want their power to end. They don't want, I mean, you know, patriarchy is a system that does benefit men. And so whilst there will be feminist men who have a clear idea of that and an analysis of that, generally speaking, it's also it's comfortable for all men, isn't it, to keep that system going in a sense. So I very much welcome male allies who want to get involved in the feminist struggle, but I also feel their main job is to challenge other men. Really, that's what I would say. And the system, and let's not make it an individual thing. It's actually about a system. And that system is, you know, interlinked with capitalism. I mean, it's a really big question. It's a big global fight. We can't simply also separate patriarchy from capitalism, from racism, and so on and so forth. These are all systems of power that are entrenched and interlinked. So it's a very big battle.
Thank you very much to the wonderful Victoria Guggenheim, the wonderful Jenny Wenhammer, and the wonderful Rahila Gupta. Thank you all for coming to this really interesting discussion. There's still so much to be discussed. Happy International Women's Day. Of course, this is not a happy day in the sense of a day, that we just celebrate and we move on. It's a day to remember that this is a long fight and battle for women's liberation, for women's rights, for women's equality. It's not only today that we're fighting it, but we're doing that every day. And we have to remember the women who are fighting for rights and for liberation in very, very difficult situations and circumstances. Now we have the situation in Ukraine. So many have been facing this situation in Iraq, in Syria, in Afghanistan, and of course, women in Iran and elsewhere who are fighting for equal rights. So thank you again, and we'll have this online, and hopefully we will be able to organize more discussions in the future. Goodbye.